I think when we initially find Conrad, the audience might be a little bit taken aback. Where's the old crust bucket skipper anyhow? Because he's sort of rude, he sort of does whatever he wants, but what I like about this game and what I like about these characters is that depending on how the player plays, the choices they make, it can sort of mold the character. Guys, look, I think we gotta listen to our experienced, beautiful, smart, and beautiful captain here. If she says we should do things
Connie, please. I didn't bring you on this trip to get laid.
Wait, what?
So Conrad will always be Conrad. Conrad will always have this sort of attitude, this sort of brash nature. But depending on the choices the player makes, he can become a heroic character, or he tries to save his own life and takes off.
You are an idiot.
They left, didn't they?
That doesn't make you any less of an idiot.
He is not the most likable guy in the world, but I think that's what's fun about this kind of storytelling, this kind of gameplay, is that Supermassive creates stories and games where there's so much branching content that a player gets to choose and sculpt the kind of storytelling that they want.
Hey, mind if I help you out a little?
1, why are you acting so weird? And 2, why are you offering to help for like the first time ever in your life?
Look, I was just thinking it might make a good first impression on the lovely Fliss.
Okay, now.
I think my favorite character in the story is actually Brad.
This is Brad, by the way, my little bro.
Miss me.
Hey man, want to crack a cold one with me? And I think I like Brad because he brings the least amount of baggage to the story. I also feel like as I'm shooting the game and watching the characters develop, to me, Brad sort of feels like the audience. He's knowledgeable about the situation that they're in.
What do you know about this wreck?
Just rumors and theories. I got tired of the speculation and wanted to see if there was actually anything there.
He has historical knowledge of the myth and also about the area, the historical area that they're in.
During World War II, they built these suckers to cruise at the highest altitude possible while maintaining the ability to carry nuclear warheads. Nerd burst.
Oh, please, keep going. But I also think that he is the one that is less distracted by the other relationships. I think that Fliss is on a mission. She's there to guard and to lead our group.
So is everybody on board and ready to go?
I think that Julia and Alex are so intertwined in their personal relationship that they're almost distracted to everything else. So Brad sort of shows up, even though he's Alex's brother, he's almost like an outsider. And so he's watching all these people. He's meeting almost everybody for the first time. So to me, I think he feels like the audience. He's discovering this world.
What's up?
Nice detective skills, by the way.
I did have maps.
Just be rad. It's right there in your name. First of all, I'm a huge fan of horror films, horror entertainment. So I do enjoy being a part of the genre. And I think really the big difference, giving a horror performance versus any other performance, is essentially they're normal people put into an extraordinary situation, a heightened situation that we would never want to run into. And so usually you get to explore the depths of terror and fear in a more exaggerated way than you would in a straight drama. But that's fun. Again, you just get put in these extraordinary situations and you just have to react to, your worst nightmares, your worst fears. And I always find that fun. I think what I'm most excited for players when they experience Man of Medan is, first of all, the world that's created. I think it's an incredibly lush, beautiful, sort of an intoxicating world. And also the variety, the beauty of where we start and the really horrific griminess of where we end, I think is a great journey. I also think that it's going to be very exciting to explore the possibility of how these characters react. And again, that's why I'm a fan of games like this. That's why I was a fan of Until Dawn, because you take these normal people and you put them in an extraordinary situation and you get to play out your fantasy as a player, essentially. You get to experiment, like, what would I do? And I think that each character is relatable. And so when you're making these decisions, when you're choosing the fate of these characters or how they will potentially explore this world, you're really asking yourself as the player, what would I do? And sometimes it's fun to be honest about what you do, and sometimes it's fun to just potentially make the wrong decision knowing you're doing that. I think that's a really fun thing, and I think players really enjoy that. Specifically, when we were first talking about the project, you can be very literal and say, well, this is a haunted ship and there's all these things. But I also think that there's a psychological element to this and a spectral sort of element. So to me, there's a lot of ghost stories that play into this. I found that each character, their fears and their horrors are manifested in their own way. So there's things where it's a very spooky ghost thing. There's also zombie-ish style horror elements. So to me, it picks a lot of great imagery from like very specific horror films and sort of combines it all. So there's a lot of influence, I think, which is cool.
Maybe I never heard about such cool ghost stories.
They're not cool ghost stories. Not like for fun. People drown in these waters and you have to respect their resting place.
Damn straight. Brad, you got a fun ghost story, right?
I've also had some very strange supernatural experiences, I guess you could say. I stayed in a hotel in Romania when I was an adult, a man, and the room was haunted. I swear the room was haunted. I had something walking around my room, footsteps around my bed every night. The 40 days I was staying there, glasses would clink in the middle of the night. I didn't see anything. I just heard things and I felt something. There was a presence in my room every night, and it was one of the scariest things I've ever gone through. And I also went down to the reception and asked, you know, do you guys ever get complaints? And they're like, oh, complaints about what? The food, the service? And I was like, no, just strange things happening in the hotel. And there was a moment of silence, and the person at reception said, we're not supposed to talk about that. And that was the end of it. So it was very scary.
So gross.
Horrible.
Hey-oh.
You have me going. Pretty cool.
I didn't actually know that much about the myth that the game is based on until I heard the title of the game and I looked it up and I started reading about it. And it's fascinating.
Look at this.
I love stories and myths that are based in history, where you can actually type something in and do some research and wow, this is actually based on an event that happened. And whether the myth is, you know, an extrapolation of the events or if it is the real life thing, I love that mystery. And I'll always go towards the side of the myth being real. I want to believe.
Well, hot diggity dong. Look at this.
And so again, I think that's why this kind of storytelling and this kind of game really appeals to me.
We should all turn in. There's some weather heading our way.
No, because according to standard vessel regulation, we're all required one more beer before hitting the hay.
Uh-huh. Where'd you read that?
The internet.
Oh, so you found a website that tells you to drink beer under every circumstance.
I'm just following orders, ma'am.
I'm into this website.
10-4, good buddy. And I'm out.
When I first heard about the idea of developing a game with such important and so many water locations, it did cause a little bit of panic, to be honest, because these things are traditionally very hard to do in real-time CG. But for us in this game, the ocean is such a pivotal location where many of the important scenes happen there. It was important to find a way to do it and do it well.
Animation plays a big part in developing a game that's on a sea surface. Obviously, we have the sea simulation. We have a boat that needs to react and behave in a believable manner on that surface. And then we have the characters that also need to react. In order to get the characters behaving realistically on the boat, we tried various different techniques of motion capture. We had performances completed on a movable floor, and that simulated the rocking behavior of the boat. All these different elements, the sea simulation, the boat rocking, and the characters all needed to work cohesively together for any given scene.
We have a procedural sea surface that's used throughout the game. It can generate varying levels of storminess, so it can go from calm right up to a raging storm that we see in one of the levels. The system can tell where things are floating in the water and generate foam around them and generate wakes from boats and that kind of thing, so that really helped us. In terms of the underwater, we looked at using volumetric lights and mist to create this illusion that light is actually traveling through the water and diffusing and dispersing as it hits the water, which was quite a difficult effect to achieve.
To capture the audio for the dive boat, we rented a small fishing boat, a similar size to the dive boat in the game. We went out with a multi-track recorder, some microphones, and positioned them in all the different angles that you need to capture the various sounds the boat makes, from the motor, the water sloshing against the hull, and the wind in the rigging. We got lucky actually on the day we went out recording. As soon as we left the safety of the harbour, a squall blew up and the waves got pretty choppy, which was great for the storm in the game. We got plenty of good source material, with the boat lurching and rocking about and creaking and groaning. Brought the audio back from sea, dried them out, and then chopped them up into loops and bits and pieces in a similar way you would with a car game, and then integrated those into quite a complex dynamic audio system that reacted to the movement of the boat and the weather systems and provided us some good results. As the storm encroaches in the game, we ramped up the audio elements of the wind and waves, and the boat engine becomes more dynamic and reactive. This sort of mirrors the emotional state of the characters in the game.
Another important aspect with the storm scene is that it represents a gear change in the story. So this is really the first time the characters are leaving the relative safety of the start of the game, and we definitely wanted to find a way to represent that in the art. So what we have here is we have a shift from the lighting style at the start of the game, which is very much a found lighting style. It's all lit by the sunlight and bounce light. There's no artificial light sources at all. And for the first time then in the storm scene, we changed to a much more filmic, set-lit feel. And that is to get that little feeling of unease there. There's a colour change also, so we go from a natural grade to more of a blue-green tint, and that also brings that feeling of unease that everything might not be quite right. And it's the first time in the game that we really see that. So it kicks off then what is to follow in the rest of the game in terms of the horror aspects when they do get on board the ship. As well as that, there's a really important change of camera in terms of when the storm starts. So we go from a more composed, steady camera to a really handheld feel. And the idea there is that we want to emphasize the effects of the storm and have a lot more kinetic feel to the camera work. Also, the feeling there is that you want the audience present in the scene, so having a handheld, it gives this feeling that there's almost an unseen participant following around the characters, filming this stuff. So for example, we try things like every time there's movement or a character is dragged or pushed off, the camera goes with them and follows them, just to get the impression that you're right there with them and you're taking part in the storm as well. So that was quite an important beat.
Once the characters journey into the ghost ship, the water's still ever present, and we use audio to remind the players of this with the waves pounding against the hull of the boat, like the heartbeat of an enormous beast with these metal creaks and groans, this leviathan ready to swallow them up at any moment.
The underwater content is a very different challenge. There's a different timing mindset you have to consider. It's all about observing and absorbing yourself into that area. We looked at various different reference, film, TV and game reference too. Luckily, 2 of us on the team scuba dived before, which was good. We even went to a local pool and did some film reference for some of the more complicated scenes in the game, the fight scenes. We found in a lot of the reference, the divers would do a small paddle movement with their hands to readjust and center themselves. And also we found a lot of the divers use the environment to pull themselves along and push off from. So we try to incorporate those details into our work.
There's something really fun about shooting on stormy conditions, and there's something fun about conveying that. But interestingly, one of the things in conveying that in terms of CG is that you have to do a lot of things that you'd maybe get for free if you were actually shooting it. So if you were really out there in a storm holding your camera, you would be getting blown around and you'd be getting rain on the lens or whatever you might get. When you work in CG, everything's automatically clean. So sometimes it's about how you can dirty up the shots and bring back some of those natural elements to convince the viewer that actually that storm is real. So for example, in the stormy sea, you have a lot of mist, a lot of rain moving around, showing how windy it is, showing how stormy it is, blowing into the camera. So that really adds a lot of life. In the underwater scene, we used it for silt, for plankton, for any kind of dirt and noise in the ocean. And without that, it can really seem quite lifeless. So that was a hugely important element.
The visual elements that we were trying to include in the development of this ship were right from the architectural drawings and then into the plans and into the white box, looking at camera angles, then looking at lighting, looking at the atmospherics, the suspense and the claustrophobic feel that we wanted to develop.
What was that?
It was very difficult to understand what a ghost ship of this nature would look like after 60 years. There's not a lot out there. And looking at research for how ships rust and decay and age, we took this and exaggerated those feelings and atmospheres to create what we wanted for our ship.
In order to make the ghost ship sound as real as possible, the team gained access to a similar era military vessel, big steel ship, and we recorded all sorts of sounds on there, from all the latches on the doors to help the Foley, the character contacting with the environment when they're on the ghost ship, all of the atmospheres in the different rooms, the engine room, all the different mechanisms available there. We even recorded impulses of each of those rooms so that each room has the identical environmental reverb that you would have had on a ship at that time.
When we're looking to light the ghost ship environment, it's really important that the tone and atmosphere that's coming from the lights also complement the story that we're trying to tell. It's not always a nice place to be, so everything just can't be well lit and visible, but we want to make sure that we're guiding the player around those environments in a satisfying way, as well as transmitting the mood that we want them to feel when they're in there. So we looked at doing things like breaking holes in the roof, breaking holes in the wall, where ambient light can kind of leak in and fill a little bit of the environment. But as well as that, sometimes we need to have spotlights and cinematic lighting, such as you would on a film set, in order to make sure that the characters look suitably heroic, menacing, scary, or whatever the scene required.
There are two sides to the personality of the ghost ship. Sometimes it's a malevolent force, other times it's a neutral force. But it's always there in the scene and always talking to the character. It's always shifting. Its metal hulk is always creaking. The ship's always responding to the waves outside, the environment outside, and we try and bring this into the environment for the player when they're inside the ship.
What was that noise?
What we wanted the player to feel when they were going around the ghost ship was to have a very spooky and damp and cold feel, but yet not knowing what was around the corner. The lights on the ship fail and fade, and so areas are really dark and silhouetted. We wanted it to feel like a dungeon, so we had chains rattling and there's smoke and mist and all of these atmospheric clues to horror films. That's what we wanted to exist inside of this ship. So it's a matter of exploration into the depths of the ship, and as you get deeper, we wanted the emotions to get more and more intense.
The characterisation and the sounds that the characters make in the environment is really key to conveying that sense of decay. They're walking around the environment in bare feet, and the sounds they make as their feet hit the environment has to be sharp, edgy, rusty and dusty. It's a really hard sound to recreate. Every tap on a bulkhead, every brush past a wall, it all has to convey that sense of decay and that roughness, that real kind of sense of a hostile environment. It's a great environment for horror.
The way the ship's built, there's lots of very unique areas that you wouldn't normally find in everyday sets, such as very long, tight corridors, and they can present somewhat of a challenge when you're thinking about how to shoot in there, but you can kind of use that to your advantage by making shots that work in there that then lend a certain character to it. So, for example, we used very short lenses to deal with those wide corridors, which then gave it a nice distorted feel at times and a very acute angle to some of the shots, which creates a certain tension, which was actually like really fitting for those scenes in the ghost ship.
Where are you taking me?
Now, why would I tell you?
It's a nice mixture between uniformity of the military style structure and also the chaos of something that is old and creepy and has kind of been overtaken by nature a little bit.
The decay of the ship, the state of decay, the rustiness is conveyed not only through the great artwork, but it's how the characters sound when they interact with that environment. It all needs to offer that kind of sharp edginess, and that's a great environment for horror.
Man of Medan we've talked about as being this cinematic horror experience with a huge branching narrative. In shared story mode, your friend can join you in that narrative, and everything you can do in the single player game, you can do with your friend in the shared story game. So it means that when you're exploring this ship in the middle of the Pacific, your friend is there with you, controlling one of the other characters, and you're playing the game together. If they go over to an object of interest, you can join them and look at it together and perhaps talk about that object and try and work out what that object represents and what secrets it contains. When you're having these dramatic conversations between the characters and you're deciding what to do, it's you and your friend talking and deciding together what to do. So it's a very social experience.
So why are we making multiplayer in Man of Medan? I think the genesis of the idea came from a prototype we tried. Wouldn't it be cool to see two players together in the same shared story experience, both making choices and taking actions that both have an impact on the story and the outcomes of that story and where it can go and lead to wildly different outcomes. And to be honest, we've been really surprised that no one else has done this kind of thing in a narrative branching story yet. So we gave it a go, tried it out, tested it, saw what worked, what didn't work, and it proved to be a lot of fun.
So, good news, bad news. Bad news? I don't see how this could get any worse.
So this is worth progressing with, this is worth trying. We could show two different players together in a scene, walking around, doing interactions together, talking to each other, having conversations with the other non-player characters.
Oh yeah, you know how to treat a lady right.
And then they could go into separate areas, so one player could stay on the boat, another player could actually go on a dive and experience very different things.
You fancy a pint with your second in command?
You are not my second in command.
Third in command.
No.
And then come back together again, and then the characters would talk about it and take that story forward.
Hey, what the hell is going on?
Hey, JJ, don't worry about it.
So when you're playing shared story and you have to make a choice, or if the other player has to make a choice, you can't see the choices that they're being presented with. You know they're making a choice, but you don't know what's on their mind. Sometimes you actually get to advise on that choice. You can say what your character thinks is the best thing to do, but they don't have to take that advice.
I'm telling you not to drink any alcohol right now.
Oh, come on. Telling you?
And their choice can have a massive impact. It can affect the whole flow of the game. Sometimes they can be quite subtle and low impact choices, but sometimes they can open up whole new scenes or cause harm to come to another character. So it is a key part of the game, and it's a key part of the experience making those choices together.
You have me going. Pretty cool.
On our previous games, the player character would have had a choice, and then the NPCs and non-player characters would have responded to that. But now we have loads of situations where the person you're talking to is a different player. So they actually have a choice about what they can say and where that might go. It's not just about relationships and traits and how that might evolve. It's player agency, whether they say nothing or say the harsh thing or the nice thing or whatever the options might be. So every single conversation has grown massively because of this stuff. And then also, whilst I'm controlling a character, you're controlling someone else, and you might be having conversations with a completely different person in a completely different space. So again, tons of extra data. But it's worth it because we have this really beautiful cinematic experience. You know, I can hear what you're experiencing. If you're talking to someone else in the same room, I can hear that, I can see that, and I can join in with that.
I'm just gonna say it. Flitz has gotta be in on this.
One unavoidable technical challenge to overcome is the fact that with any multiplayer game you have latency, but at the same time, in order to maintain the tone and the feel of the game, we want to have as smooth an experience as possible. So we go to some lengths to make sure you don't ever have that problem. I would say the biggest challenge for me has been the sheer quality of data involved and maintaining the quality of that data but still fitting it onto a disc for a console.
Anywhere.
Designing a branching narrative game already presents a load of challenges, and multiplayer, putting a second player into the story, exponentially increases those challenges. It really is very difficult. The first thing we do is at the design phase, we think of things that will work really well with multiplayer. So these are very, very high level things. Key scenes that really showcase the multiplayer, that really give the players interesting choices and big dilemmas. They're designed on paper and storyboarded very, very early on. And the narrative, to some extent, is structured around them. When we're happy with that, when we've got a narrative that we can really get behind, and this narrative also incorporates the whole of the single player game, then we start to break it down in games terms. We have got a tool we created in-house, which is a massive flow tool for the whole game. And we really break the game down into individual bits in that flow tool, and it has to be very, very exact. Once it's written, then we can actually play the game in a very basic form, just with text and storyboards, but making all the decisions and doing all the exploration, and we play it over and over again. We're trying to test whether the game works well, and we play it multiplayer. So we have two people playing the game in this very basic format, and we're finding out, does the game work? Are there any weak points? Are there any points where one player's not doing enough? And that allows us to iterate and refine the gameplay very, very quickly. And only when we're completely happy with that game in that very basic format do we go into full production and start recording data and putting the rest of the game together.
We need to leave. Now!
While we do use the Unreal Engine, we've written at the core a GameFlow tool that allows us to build narrative games and plot out all the different branching possibilities that are required, not just for the choices that a single player can make, but also the differing scenes that multiple players will be in at the same time and how they relate with one another. Then we can build experiences that time correctly, because it's no good if one player finishes their section in 2 minutes and another finishes theirs in 20 minutes. That's just going to be a bad experience for the players.
Alex, this is crazy!
What we want is for the multiplayer experience to feel as close to watching a movie as the single player experience does. And that's why we've implemented some behind-the-scenes technology to make sure that this happens.
When we released Until Dawn, one of the things that happened was that people streamed the game. And one of the things that they did when they streamed the game was they invited a bunch of people around. They all sat on a sofa and they chose a character and they controlled the character when that character was controllable. And they kind of did a very loose competition around it. So movie night mode is our way of reflecting that back to the player. It's our way of enabling that behaviour and refining it a little bit. So when you load up movie night mode, you'll input the number of players you want to be in the game, and you'll be able to put your names into the game, and then you all choose a character, and the game helps you through that process. So at key points, when a player character changes, the game will tell you whose turn it is and prompt you to pass the controller to them, and that player will then take over and control their character.
God damn it. This is all my fault.
We also have these awards at the end of key sections of the game where we say how people did, who had the quickest reactions, did anyone lose a character, and it's just to reflect that all back to you. It's a very cool mode. We think people will really enjoy playing it.
We designed Man of Medan to be playable in various different ways: shared story, movie night, and single player, none of which compromise the cinematic story that we're trying to tell. Horror is a social experience. You go to the movies or the cinema with your friends, you watch a TV series at home with your loved one, your partners. A haunted house experience, going to get the crap scared out of you. And even Halloween, it's all social, it's fun, it's together. Horror together feels right. And that's why it works so well in the Dark Pictures Anthology and in Man of Medan, because it's that shared experience, and that's what we want to riff on and get people scared together and get people socialising together, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And as with any good horror game or film or movie, TV experience, some of the characters are going to die. If your character dies, we're going to have to sit and watch.
Can the choices one player make cause the death of another player's character? I don't want to give away any spoilers, but certainly the other player's choices have a massive impact on the flow of that story.
Get off our boat.
It wouldn't be a supermassive game if that didn't happen.
Bring them downstairs. Take this. Use it if you have to.